So in 1986, we got the law that governs fine print, or that may govern fine print, when America adopted its current reigning anti-hacking statute, something called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, or CFAA. And CFAA struggled with what kind of behavior they were going to outlaw. It didn't want to set out a series of things that you weren't allowed to do with computers, because obviously that would get out of date very quickly. Nor did it want to say that everything you do with a computer is automatically illegal, because people do lots of things with computers, including computers they don't own in the course of their normal activities. So instead what they said was what must have seemed at the time to be a very elegant solution. They said in 1986, if you use a computer that you don't own, and you do something that you are not authorized to do with it, if you exceed your authorization on it, then you violate the law and you're a felon. Now, since then, a lot of prosecutors have taken the view that this fine print, the fine print that says you're not allowed to look inside a phone and tell us about the malicious software, or you're not allowed to look inside a laptop and discuss what you found there, or you're not allowed to look inside your school laptop and discuss what you found there, or you're not allowed to look inside the other devices you own and describe what you found there, or do other things that may be crucial to being secure in your person. Some prosecutors have taken the view that anything you do that violates these terms of service is a felony. And I think they're wrong, but that doesn't stop them from terrorizing people who violate those terms of service, because when you break the law in this country, or you're accused of breaking the law, and a prosecutor decides you've done something wrong, that prosecutor has enormous leeway to threaten you with huge amounts of prison time in a prison system that the Supreme Court has already said is inhumane and has ordered the release of prisoners from because it's so overcrowded and there are so many problems with it. And 97% of the people who get the federal indictment brought against them end up settling because they're so afraid of facing all the time that they might end up doing that they settle for less time. So I'd like to tell you about someone who didn't settle, someone who you probably heard a lot about recently. Excuse me. I've got, no, it's okay, I can hang on to it. A young man named Aaron Swartz. Now, I met Aaron when he was 14, and he was coming to San Francisco for standards meetings. Aaron was a very bright young man. He actually looked a lot younger than his 14 at the time. He was one of those kids who, until he was about 17 or 18, looked about 12. So he was this baby-faced kid who used to come to San Francisco, and my friend Lisa was his chaperone. And so we'd pick him up at the airport. I was living over in Potrero Hill then. And we'd show him around, we'd take him to restaurants, we'd watch him eat nothing but white food. That was all Aaron would eat. And we'd listen to him talk about the stuff he was working on, because he and Lisa were both working on standards definition for RSS. And RSS is one of the key technologies of the internet. And today it's how a lot of the important stuff that we do gets done. And we could see then that Aaron would go on to do some pretty cool stuff. And indeed he did. In 2005, he joined the company Reddit with the title co-founder. People will tell you he didn't co-found Reddit, but he was, in fact, officially, that was on his business card when he joined Reddit. And Reddit, as you know, probably got bought out by Condé Nast and was integrated briefly into Wired. And Aaron didn't like working there. He didn't really like working in an office. He kind of engineered his own firing by basically gross public insubordination. And they canned him, they forward vested him, and he got out. And he was kind of ready for his next act, so he went around to do some other stuff, and he began to make an even bigger mark on the world. In 2008, he set his sights on something called Pacer. Pacer is a database that holds all the court files and all of the judge-made law, all the court decisions in this country. So you'll know that Congress meets and makes laws like the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And that's kind of like the requirements document for our law. It's the thing where the legislators have sat down and said, this is what the law should do. And then judges interpret what they've said to make sure that the law is doing what it should do. So they get the court cases brought before them, and they look at what Congress has said, they look at what other judges have decided, they look at relevant parallel cases, and then they make new decisions that form part of what the next judge will decide. And so if you're going to obey the law, you need to be able to see not just the requirements document, but the source code that the judges are writing, because you need to know what the law says. You need to know what the judges have said about the law. And that law has not been available to the public. In the 1980s, tried to put it online. They did put it online. They put it online through online databases that were at the time very expensive to run, but by today's standards are laughably simple. You know, in the realm of here's 50 cents, go buy some storage on Amazon, kid. Simple to set up and run, and at the time, back when they set these things up in the Paleolithic era, they were charging 10 cents a page to recoup the enormous cost of running it. These days, those enormous costs are non-existent, but the 10 cents a page is still there. So some people who thought that this was absurd and who thought that everybody should get access to the law decided that they would take some steps to make sure that happened. Because the weird quirk about this is that although the law was behind a paywall, it's not copyrighted because it's the law, right? How silly would it be if you couldn't copy up the laws and tell people what they said, right? Who would own the laws if the laws were copyrighted? The government? Would the government sell you the right to copy the law so that you could tell people that they were violating it? That's crazy. So the law was public domain. It just was not somewhere where you could get it. If you're a science fiction fan, you'll remember that scene from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy where they come by to knock down Arthur Dent's house. And he says, this is the first I've heard about it. And they say, well, the plans were on display in the public display office. And he said, well, I went to see them, but they were in a third sub-basement, and the stairs were out, and the lights were out, and it was behind a locked door with a sign on it that said, beware of the leopard. And the man from the planning office says, yes, that's the display room, right? So we have these laws on display. You just have to pay 10 cents a page to access them, and maybe download thousands of pages before you find the bit that makes it all make sense to you. And the legal stuff you're trying to figure out for yourself. So they built this thing called Recap. Recap is an anagram of Pacer, and the way that Recap worked it was a little plugin, and when you went to pay for a page from Pacer, first you would check to see whether anyone had ever gotten that page out of Pacer before while using the Recap plugin. And if you had, it would give you the copy they paid for. And if they hadn't, you pay your 10 cents, but it would add it to Recap. So one payment pays for all. And over time, it would all end up in Recap, and you wouldn't, you'd be kind of, we would have free and public access to the internet. Great idea. And Aaron decided to kind of give it a bit of a goose. He went and he wrote a crawler that downloaded the 20% of American case law that's most widely cited. Big chunk of really important source code, and stuck it where anyone could get access to it. A lot of us cheered. The FBI got pissed off. They went and they surveilled Aaron. They opened a file on Aaron. They brought Aaron for questioning him without his lawyer. He said, I'm not going to talk to you, I want to have a lawyer here. This is the PSA portion of tonight's presentation. If you are ever brought before someone involved in law enforcement who wants to ask you some questions, you should really ask to have a lawyer present. And in fact, you really must ask to have a lawyer present. That's, I think, probably why Aaron walked away from that, feeling very good about himself, as did many of us. And he decided to do some other stuff. And doing other stuff sometimes involves taking risks, and Aaron was young and a bit foolhardy, and he set his sights next on something called JSTOR, which was a database of scholarly and technical and scientific journal articles, largely paid for out of the public purse, either at public universities or universities that had public funding, or through government agencies. And if you know, the source code was or the requirements document is the congressional law, and the source code is the judge law, this is like the core dump. This is what reality is, right? This is scientists who've gone out on behalf of the public to figure out how the world works at public expense. And every couple of years, the political classes come to us and they say, elect me, I know how the world works and I'm going to fix it. And we're supposed to make informed decisions when we cast our ballot, but all the information about how the world works is only accessible behind JSTOR's paywall. And you know, if you go to a big rich university, you can get access to it, but if you're an individual, or if you live in the developing world, or if you're in an institution that can't afford the giant cost, you couldn't. And for many people, for many years, this had been a disgrace, and many people have campaigned on it. Aaron went further. He began to go to MIT's public network, where there was unfettered access to JSTOR, and download lots of articles. And they figured out that someone was downloading lots of articles, and they kept trying to shut that down. So eventually he walked into a closet on campus, and the newspaper accounts of this. They made it sound like Aaron had gone into like a high security facility, like a level 3 biohazard facility where, you know, humming racks of servers were, and he plugged something in. He went into a closet that the public routinely had access to. There was a homeless guy who kept his stuff there. And he plugged a laptop in to the switch and downloaded a lot of articles. And when he came back, and when they figured out who he was, because they had CCTV footage, they arrested him, and they charged him with Computer Fraud and Abuse Act charges, and they threatened him with 50 years in jail. And they, like all the other 97% of people who get a federal indictment against them, they wanted him to accept a plea bargain that involved prison time, and he didn't want to do that, and he wanted to fight it. And years went by while he fought it, right up to last January 11th, which was the second anniversary of when, the second anniversary of when Aaron had been charged, when he hanged himself in his apartment in Brooklyn. Now, before that happened, in 2011, Aaron and many other activists, some of them in this room, some of them out in Boston where another center for this stuff was situated, the Fight for the Future people, decided that they were going to do something about a terrible copyright bill called SOPA. And the students among us will remember SOPA because that's the law that made it impossible for them to do their homework one day because Wikipedia shut down. And SOPA was a crazy, crazy copyright proposal. It included a provision that said that if you provide a place on the internet where people can talk to each other, so you've got a Little League team, and you have a message board where you talk about upcoming games and who's going to bring the potato salad and who's going to bring the balls and who's going to bring the bats, that you as the host of that online message board are responsible for making sure that nobody on the message board infringes copyright, and that nobody on the message board links to a website that infringes copyright, and that nobody on the message board links to a website that contains links to a website that infringes copyright. So you've got this little message board where you talk about your upcoming Little League games, and someone comes along and posts a link to Facebook where there are some photos of last week's Little League game. Now you, the parent who manages that Facebook, that message board, you are responsible for making sure that no one on Facebook ever links to a website that infringes copyright, or you can be a party to it. This is madness. It would shut down the internet as we understand it. It would turn it into kind of glorified cable TV where we were spoken to but couldn't speak to each other or speak back. And I was on the Hill like a week before what was to be the first and theoretically the only debate on this was scheduled, where they were going to just rush it through. And everybody I talked to on the Hill at the time said, just go home. There's no way you're going to make a difference on this. They have counted the signatures, and this is a law, right? You can't win it. But we won it. Aaron and other people built next-generation campaigning technology to reach out to senators, to reach out to congressmen, and these congressmen and senators had gone into this feeling, I think, like their major funders insisted on it, and they couldn't get reelected without funding, and so it was going to happen. And they came out of that experience realizing that as hard as it is to get reelected if you don't have any money, it's much harder to get reelected if you don't have any votes. And having heard from so many of their constituents in such a short time, thanks to these great tools that were built, they really made this amazing and alarming reversal. Now, all of this stuff, where people have discovered what's going on in their devices and reported it and demanded that their devices serve them as honest servants and not as treacherous spies that do things without their knowledge behind their back and to their great detriment. All this stuff is possible because people feel confident that they're allowed to look inside their devices and talk about it. But we have some pretty bad law in this country and in many countries around the world about devices and looking inside them. In 1998, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was adopted in this country, and this is a law that's supposed to update copyright law for the digital age. And among the many provisions in the DMCA that are problematic, there's a thing called anti-circumvention. And what anti-circumvention does is it creates a new kind of protection, not against crimes, but against removing locks that might, in some context, prevent a crime. So if you have a device that has a lock on it, if you have a wireless mic that's locked into a certain kind of amplification system, or if you have a mobile phone that's locked to a certain ecosystem so you can only install Apple-approved apps on it, or if you have a games console that only plays games that come from a certain company and have been blessed by it, somewhere in that device is a program that waits for you to say, connect this to a rival device, or allow someone else's software to run on it. And that program's job is to watch for you saying that, and when you do, its job is to kind of swim up out of the depths of that device and say, I'm sorry, I can't let you do that, Dave. those technologies are illegal to remove, and they're illegal to tell people how to remove, and they're illegal to tell people information that might help them figure out how to remove them, provided that they restrict access to some kind of copyrighted work, provided that they form an effective means of access control to a copyrighted work. And this has been truly disastrous, not least because nobody wants the "I can't let you do that, Dave" program on their computer. If you have a computer that has that program on it, you will try to delete that program the first time you run up against it, right? That nobody wants a computer that says no. And so you can't just have an icon on the desktop labeled HAL9000.exe, right? That icon has to be hidden in the computer, and for that to work, the computer has to be designed again with the facility to disguise what it's doing from its owner. Now, knowing what our computers are doing is an increasingly vital matter, and sometimes it's a matter of life and death.